Hello, in this video we're going to look at how do we write trig equations from their graphs. So let's jump right into an example. Whenever we're looking at any graph, we're going to follow the same steps. First we'll find the midline, then the amplitude. We'll decide between sine or cosine, because in any of these graphs you could use sine or cosine. Then from that find the phase shift, then finally find the period and use the period to find your b. Alright, so if I'm looking at this graph, to find the midline is just the average of the top, or the highest value and the lowest value. So my midline is right here on this x-axis. So there was no shift up or down. Now from that I can see that the amplitude would be 10. Now I have to decide if I want to use sine or cosine. You see, because if I started here, this would be a sine graph, but it's much easier just to start right here on this axis and make this a cosine graph, since cosine starts above. So I'll use cosine. Now because I decided to use cosine, which would start here on the y-axis, there's actually no phase shift for this function. If I would have used the sine function, it would have been left by pi. But since I'm only looking from here to here, there's no phase shift. Alright, so looking back to where I drew these lines here, we can see that this function has a period of 4 pi. And because b is equal to 2 pi over the period, 2 pi over 4 pi gives me 1/2. So now I have plenty of information to write the equation of this function. We'd have y equals the amplitude 10, we chose cosine of bx, so 1/2 x. There was no phase shift, so I can close that, and there was no shift up or down, so plus 0. The equation of this graph is y equals 10 cosine 1/2 x. Alright, for this problem we're going to find the equation in terms of sine. So even though this could be a nice easy cosine function, we're going to do it as a sine just to make it more challenging. So if I go from 1 to 3, I have a nice sine function right here. Now from this graph we can see this midline right here at -4. So the graph has been shifted down 4, and we can also just measure that amplitude and see that that's equal to 3. Now because it's a sine function, this function started right here, which means that it had a phase shift of left 1. And then finally we can just look from -1 to 3, that's a period of 4. So we know b is just going to be 2 pi over 4, or pi over 2. And so now we're ready to write the equation of this curve. This would be y equals my amplitude 3 sine. Keep the b factored out for a moment, pi over 2, because the x plus 1, that 1 only shifted the x, not a pi over 2x, and it was shifted down 4. Now this is a totally acceptable answer from most, but just to clean it up a little bit, you can multiply through with the b. We'd have 3 sine of pi over 2 x plus pi over 2 minus 4. Alright, now this last one has a tricky period. So what I would like you to do is to pause the video, do this in terms of cosine, and figure out as much as you can about the graph just from looking at these points. Alright, so you should have the midline is y equals -2 and the amplitude is 3. Now you might have a different phase shift from what I'm going to pick, just because you can start these functions anywhere. This cosine could start here, here, whatever. Alright, so for this problem I'm just going to start here because we haven't had a negative cosine yet. And that gives me a phase shift of left 2. The only problem is I don't know where this function ends. It looks like it's a little bit more than 1/2, but I don't know. So the way I'm going to approach this is look at the points that I do know. From -2 to 6, this is 8 units. And within those 8 units, I have 1, 2, 3 whole periods. So the period is just 8 over 3. And that's just because these 8 units can be divided evenly into 3 periods. So, since b is equal to 2 pi over the period, so over 8 over 3, that's just 2 pi times 3/8, which is going to be, this would be 3 pi over 4. Alright, so the equation of this line is y equals, don't forget that this was a negative cosine, so negative 3 cosine 3 pi over 4 x plus 2, all shifted down 2. And just to make that a little bit nicer, we say y equals negative 3 cosine 3 pi over 4x. Now multiply that by 2, and we get 3 pi over 2 minus 2. And that's how we write equations given graphs. Goodbye.